So next up, a one-off video on something called the math object. Built into JavaScript, out of the box for free, we get access to this thing called math with a capital M. And it's just a collection of properties and methods that have to do with math in some way. So we have methods like rounding, or round. We have a method called abs for absolute value. We have constants, mathematical constants like pi, the value of pi, 3.14159, and so on, which at one point I knew the first 200 digits of in like 4th, 5th grade. We had a competition at my school. Anyway, I've lost almost all of that. So this math object is here in the console. I don't have to do anything. I can just reference it, and I can actually just hit enter on math and expand this. So we haven't talked about objects yet. And you don't need to really understand what an object is in JavaScript, except for the fact that it's a collection of properties and methods. So one option would have been to make just a variable called pi that we always have access to, and another one called e, if you know Euler's number, or the square root of 2. That could just be available anywhere, right? So I could just do that, or JavaScript could do that. It doesn't, because instead of just polluting the namespace, which basically means instead of just having a bunch of variable names taken up, JavaScript's approach was to combine all of those into a single object, so they're all nested under this thing called math. So I have to access math.pi or math.e for Euler's number. You probably won't really need either of these, at least not with what we're going to focus on for now, but they are there. But what I want to focus on are the methods. These methods range from things that you probably won't need to use at all, like, arctan, or cosine, sine, square root you may want to know about, but the ones I'll be showing are mainly around random numbers and a little bit around rounding and flooring your numbers. So you can read more about the math object on MDN. There's a page for every single method if you wanted to learn about sine and how it works. Not necessarily the math behind it, but how the sine method works and if it expects any arguments and how they work and all of that. But I'll just show a couple of these methods right off the bat. First of all, we've got one called floor. Math.floor will take a number with a decimal and chop off that decimal. So it's not rounding. This could be 9999999, which would round up to 24. It's just chopping it off. So that's floor. We also have ceiling or ceil. So I could have 34.1, and it's going to round it up no matter what. So 34.9999 is going to ceiling to 35, and 34.01 will also round up or ceiling up to 35. So those, maybe not that useful on their own, but what I'm going to show you now is how we generate random numbers. So there's a built-in method to that math object, and this is really the whole reason I'm showing you the math object in the first place. There's a built-in method called random, and random is going to give us a random decimal number between 0 and 1, but it won't actually include 1. So it's going to be between 0 and 9.999999999, math.random, just like that. So every time I call that, it is a method, I need those parentheses. Every time I call it, I get a different, very long decimal. Usually, sometimes that's fine, but most of the time, if we're trying to get a random number, we might be trying to get a random number between 1 and 2. We might want a coin flip, or 0 and 1, where it's just integers. The whole number 1, whole number 2, like what's your favorite number between 1 and 100? I don't want to hear, 94.1281593. I just want to hear 91 or 92 or whatever the number is. So to do that requires a bit more work. We don't actually have a method called random integer or random int or something like that. Many other programming languages do. In JavaScript, we don't. But we can do some math. We can take a number like this and then floor it in order to get a whole number. So it's a multi-step process. Let's say we want random numbers between 1 and 10. I can call math.random. So that gives me a very long decimal between 0 and 1. Then I can multiply by 10. So now I'm looking at 5.961, blah, blah, blah. Then I can floor that to just get 5. Okay, so let's try that. Let's do a number between 1 and 5. So math.random, and I'm going to multiply by 5. I want a number between 1 and 5. So that gives me 3.7 this time. Next time it's That gave me 1.8, 4.1, 4.2, 0.8. Okay. And then I'm going to math.floor that. But I want to floor the entire thing. So what I did here was put it in a variable and then floor that. But that's a bit extra. I don't really need this. I don't need this step on its own. So I'm going to do a math.floor. Remember what floor does. It chops off the decimal. So math.floor of our random number multiplied by 5. Okay, so we're getting 0, 3, 4, 3, 4, 2, 1. So I am getting 5 random numbers. The problem I have now is that it's going from 0, right? Our random numbers, just math.random in general, goes from 0 to 1, non-inclusive. Then I multiply it by 5. I'm never actually going to have 5 as a random number. I'm going to have 0 up until 4. So if I want 1 to 5, I then need to shift everything up by adding 1. So this will give me a random number from 1 to 5. Now what if I wanted to go from 1 to 10? Well, I just multiply this by 10. Now I have random numbers between 1 and 10, random integers. What if I want to go from 20 to 22? Well, all I need to do is figure out how many options, how many numbers am I trying to generate? Well, 20, 21, and 22, that's 3 numbers. And then I can shift this upwards by 20. So I get 20, 21, 22. So not that common to do that. It's I'd say most common to generate a number starting from either 0 to something or 1 to something. But if you ever need a range, you can shift it upwards as much as needed. So that is math.random. On its own, it gives us a random decimal from 0 to 1. We can transform that and use math.floor to help us get integers where we don't have that crazy looking decimal. So we have other methods on the math object, right? Round, absolute value, power, which will raise something to a power. Although we already know how to do that, we don't really need the math object, right? We can do this. Math.power of, let's say, 2 to the third is the same as just 2 star star 3. So if you have any other questions about the math object, take a look at MDN. Remember, we have not really covered objects at all. So all that we know right now is that an object is just a place to store stuff. So it's not all hanging out on its own in the middle of nowhere. All this math functionality has been combined into a single object, a single entity called math with a capital M.